All right, hopefully everyone can hear me. Hello. So good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the Wayne State University.
All right, hopefully everyone can hear me.
School of Medicine, Residency,
Hello.
Immigration.
So good afternoon and welcome.
So I can hear myself talk on it while I talk. Okay, so my name is Adriana Clapp, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at Wayne State. We also have Felix Shun, who's also a fourth-year Canadian medical student at Wayne State. Today, it is our pleasure to serve as the Google Hangout moderators for today. This Hangout is designed where you will have the opportunity to ask questions to Sarah Peterson, an attorney who focuses on employment-based immigration, including H1B visas and J1 waivers. We also have our student affairs representatives. We have Dr. Chadwell and Ms. Connors, who are going to be observing for today. We also have Kathleen Holbrook, who's our on-site tech. So thank you for everybody for being here today. So Sarah Peterson is like to share her expertise and advice on residency and the visa process. So the Google Hangout is being streamed live at wayne.edu/live. During the Hangout, if you would like to join the conversation, you can ask questions. So you can use the live chat feature that is located on the side of this video stream. So now I'll introduce our main panel member a little bit more. So Sarah Peterson has been practicing employment-based immigration law since 2006, helping transition foreign-born doctors and other professionals to some of the USA's top university and residency programs. As mentioned, her focus is on employment-based immigration, including H1B visas and J1. She holds a joint law degree and Master in Public Policy from the University of Minnesota Law School and the Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs. So we are really grateful that she has taken the time to answer our questions today. Ms. Peterson, I didn't know if you wanted to, if I missed anything, or if you wanted to start off with a little intro there.
Thank you. And as I told Felix and Adriana, this is a new format to me, so hopefully it goes off without hitch. But yeah, I've been working with immigration and specifically with physicians who need to go through the U.S. immigration process for 16 years. So I hope that I can answer the questions that everyone has. And rather than talk more about myself, let's dive into the questions.
Okay, great. And Felix will help us here with moderating some of the questions.
Let's start off with the questions that we got through our form. One of the first ones we had is that, do we need to apply through, if we're going to go for J1, do we need to apply through ECFMG? And if so, when should we start doing that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think, before we start, I think maybe I'll conceptualize. It looked like a lot of the questions they revolve around OPT and then the J1 transition. And when I was reading through some of the pre-submitted questions, they jump over kind of around a little bit. So I think it would be helpful to maybe just start with what is ECFMG and then talk about who needs to go through ECFMG. ECFMG it's a body in the United States that does a couple of different functions. It is the only body that can help international medical graduates transition into J1 status to do the residency and or fellowship subspecialty training. So if you are going into J1 status to actually complete your residency and or your fellowship, then you absolutely have to work through ECFMG. But there's also another function that ECFMG does, and that's the ECFMG certification. So I think it's really important to understand who needs to do the ECFMG certification. So any international medical graduate needs ECFMG certification. But all of you are attending a US medical school, so you're not even considered international medical graduates pursuant to what our immigration system defines them as. An international medical graduate is someone who achieves a medical degree outside of from anywhere other than an accredited US medical institution or accredited Canadian medical institution. So because you guys are going to a US accredited medical institution, you're not technically considered IMGs, international medical graduates, and you do not need to get the ECFMG certification. And then that kind of fast forwards when you look at your USMLEs to 1, 2, and the third step, ordinarily you would need the ECFMG certification if you were considered an international medical graduate, but because you're not, you don't need this certification. So if we can kind of conceptualize, there's a certification piece of it, but because you all are graduating from a U.S. medical school, you don't need the certification. From ECFMG being the sole sponsor of residency for physicians who don't have U.S. citizenship, I think that helps lay the landwork. Does that make sense?
That definitely helps. So I think the question is, we're all USMG, we're all U.S. medical grads. So really, we don't need ECFMG certification, but we do need their sponsorship to get a J1.
Oh, sorry, I just needed to make sure I wasn't unmute. If you go into, so you all want to do residency in the United States, and because you don't have U.S. citizenship, you need some sort of immigration status. And the only two, well, the main two statuses that you will pursue to complete your residency and/or subspecialty training is either J1 status, which is an international trainee classification. And I think you all get 1 year of OPT status afterwards. So it's a 1 year employment authorization card. So you can do the first year of residency pursuant to your OPT status. But the second and the third year for your residency, you're either going to need to transition into J1 status. So you need to work through ECFMG for your J1 status, or you need to transition into H1B status. And that's done directly through the USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. And largely, the status that you can go in will be decided by the program with which you match. It used to be historically that there was a 50-50 split in the country in terms of J1 versus H1B. And now we're seeing more and more programs require J1 status. So most of you will be doing 1 year in OPT, and then the second and third year, probably you're going to be doing J1 status unless, we can get into the nuances of this, but unless you marry a U.S. citizen and can get permanent residence based on marriage to a U.S. citizen. But I think ordinarily you're going to expect to go into J1 or H1B status. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry. There's a follow-up question that's kind of follows the timelines that we need to be aware of in moving from OPT to J1. Like, when should we apply for OPT through our OISS office? When should we apply to kind of like J1 certification through like ECFMG?
Have you guys been working with your international offices? Is that a common part of your program? Just from my
I believe amongst a lot of the students is that our OISS office is weak for the med school.
Okay.
So we don't really interact with them a whole lot.
Yeah. So in order to get OPT, you have to be you have to have completed almost all of the course requirements, and so that gets tricky in terms of the specific timing. I would reach out to the international office now, because you have to be at a certain point in your medical degree program in order for them to issue the I-20 that's required to file for the OPT. So I can't give you a specific timeline. That's a very direct question for OIS, and they should be able to answer that for you. But what I would encourage everyone to do, OPT can, that card, that work authorization card, can take 5 to 6 months. Usually with students, we're seeing it a little bit quicker, but you all need to be filing for the OPT at the earliest possible moment that you can file. And so it's going to be in the spring at some point. But I think for medical students, it's a little bit different than maybe the bachelor's and master's degree students. So. Okay.
Now that assuming we've got our OPT card in hand, our OPT in hand, we're like kind of in the starting our first year of residency. Should we then go through ECFMG for kind of, is it for certification, or is it kind of sponsorship?
Yeah, and this kind of ties into another question that I saw about with whom do you talk about at the residency in terms of your immigration status. And when you guys are going through the match program, you're the fourth years, so Felix, Adriana, and anyone else in this chat, when you're doing the interviews, I would have the conversation then. And then what that permits you to do is understand what you need to do for the second year, right? Because you're going to be doing OPT for the first year, and then you need to know if H1B is an option or if you're going to have to do J1. And if you're going to go the J1 route, if the program requires J1, you're going to be connecting with ECFMG, I would say by the January, so that would be, January of your first year. ECFMG ordinarily for J1 status purposes works pretty quickly. You've got the US medical degree, so you're not going to have to get the transcripts from abroad. But ECFMG can issue that J1 document pretty quickly, and they're very responsive. They work really well with medical students, but I would say January is a good time to reach out and just see what they're recommending at that time. If you're looking at H1B, certainly you're going to want to, one of the other questions is, can you expedite an H1B petition? Because, right now you've probably heard that you can't, and expedite just means speeding it up. For CAP exempt employers, which a residency most of the time will be, because it's either a nonprofit that's affiliated with a university or a university itself, you can expedite the H1B petition, but you can file an H1B petition as early as 6 months prior to the start date. So this gets really complicated, and please, type me if you can't understand what I'm trying to articulate here, but your OPT is going to be good for 1 year. So you come back 6 months from the expiration date of your OPT card, and that's when you want to have your program be filing the H1B petition for you. You can still expedite it, which just means paying an extra fee, and they process the H1B petition in 15 days. And like I said, most of you will still be eligible to use that expedite feature, but I would start the H1B process 6 months prior.
Okay.
Sorry, just one thing I wanted to quickly jump in was Ms. Connors just wanted to mention that once the students work with OISS, the International Student Office, the counselor can complete the OPT form. Just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because there's an additional form that you have to file to get the OPT card and a fee that you pay, and the International Office should be able to help you with that, as Kathleen said. Yeah.
This seems to be a quick one. Apparently one of us is lucky to already have an EAD card. Do they still need visa sponsorship before they start residency?
So you can get an EAD card on a lot of different bases. And so I would can that individual message in and tell me the basis? If it's a 1 year post-completion OPT, then it's 1 year. If it's based on, you can get OPT for so many different reasons. If it's an OPT that you can extend, then sure, then that's fine. And that makes the residency process very easy. But there are a lot of different OPT cards that are tied to a specific time frame. So, oh, that's good. My automatic light went off. Hold on a second. Okay, sorry about that. But if that individual can maybe live chat us in and tell me the basis for the OPT, that would be really helpful. Or the EAD card.
All right. Someone wants to know about O visas, which I understand are given for extraordinary ability.
Yeah.
I guess maybe a quick overview of that. I'm not sure if any of us at this stage when our careers would be considered for one.
No, and it's a really good question to ask, and it's a really important thing to file away, because the O1 visa is for individuals with extraordinary abilities. And just because you're a medical student doesn't necessarily preclude you from being classified as such. And really what O1 status, if you're going to a program that is willing to sponsor you for O1, and if the program feels that you are in the top 5% of your field of endeavor, then it's another option for you. The benefit, we can kind of go through, I should have done a flow chart in terms of the benefits of J1 and the downfalls of J1, the benefits of H1B versus the downfall of H1B versus O1. But O1 is nice because you can, if you qualify, and to qualify there's a list of 10 criteria the government needs you to show you meet at least 3 of. There are things like publications, original contributions to your field. If you've happened to win a Nobel Peace Prize or any sort of international award, clearly then that makes you extraordinary. But patents, if you're doing research in a patentable area, things of that nature, being your novel work being talked about by colleagues in your professional field, that's how you qualify for O1 status. So certainly probably among the people in this chat today, there's probably a couple of you who could meet the criteria if you're heavy into the research side of things. So it's a good option to keep in mind if you happen to be one of those people. And then the program would sponsor you because H1B is the most heavily regulated of those three classifications. And so that's why most programs are trying to push you into J1. And I think long-term, depending on if you want to do 3-year residency, it's nice. If you want to go into subspecialty, it gets a little tricky because once you are in O1 status for 3 years, you can only renew it for 1-year chunks. And then O1 also, if you want to become a permanent resident, it's not as permissive as H1B status would be. So if you're doing a 3-year residency, I'd say, yeah, if you qualify, great. If you're looking to go into, thoracic surgery, maybe not, maybe not, but it just depends on your residency and your fellowship and what they're willing to sponsor you for.
All right. We got a question about kind of timelines because J1, my understanding, is only good for 7 years. And then someone mentioned they were doing a residency program for 5 years and then a fellowship for another 1 or 2. Is that the same J1, or will they need to be? They need to reapply, and will that impact their return of service obligations?
Right. So really good question. So ordinarily J1 you can only get for 7 years. So it's in 1-year increments all the way through your training programs. However, for extraordinary need, you can apply for, and we see it usually for like our cardiac surgeons, they will get an 8th year. It's hard to get, but you can do it. But J1 is J1 for international medical graduates. So it's all the same. You work through ECFMG as the program sponsor, but you do have to make that compelling showing of why you need that 8th year.
So to clarify, to make sure we have a good understanding, you do your 5 years on the J1 with 5-year blocks sponsored through ECFMG, and then you go to your fellowship, which you do another 1 or 2 year and 1 year, another 1 or 2 years in blocks. And then that's also still sponsored by ECFMG, correct?
Yeah, and so when you're looking at your training programs, you're looking in the blocks, right? But ECFMG will give you a form. It's called the DS 2019 form. You will get that every year. So we'll start July 1st to June 30th, and then whatever year, 2019, and then they'll extend it for your 2nd year of residency, and they'll extend it for another year for your 3rd year, all the way through whatever medical discipline you are going through. Does that help make sense? So you're going to have a 1-year grant of J1 status for each year that you're going through your residency and or subspecialty training.
Yeah, that's fine. That clears it up. H1, so spouses of people on H1Bs or J1s, do they have work authorization automatically?
Good question. So spouses of J2 or of J1 are J2, and they can apply for employment authorization. So it's a really nice option. Okay. Spouses of H1B only are eligible for employment authorization if the H1B holder has gotten sufficiently far enough in the permanent resident process. So when we look, we're talking about non-immigrant classifications right now. Mm-hmm. If you want to stay in the United States long term, you have to look at the permanent resident process. And so if the H1B holder has an approved immigrant visa petition, it's the form I-140, then the H4 dependent can apply for an employment authorization document. Okay. I would also caveat that with the administration the US government has been trying to get rid of the H4 EAD for a very long time. There's a lawsuit that's been going on for a year and a half, almost since the H4 EAD was rolled out. And the government has made every indication that it intends at some point to remove the H4 EAD option. So if you're one of the people whose spouses is an H1B, keep that in the back of your mind that at some point we all expect the H4 EAD to go away. And so then J2 would be the only EAD option for dependent spouses.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick thing, it's kind of like a summary that's on the side panel here is, would you be able to just kind of talk a little bit about the J1 and H1B and the limitations and benefits of each?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's kind of the conceptualization. So when I started out, I said most programs require J1 versus H1B. J1 status, a lot of people don't want to go into J1 status because as a clinical physician, you inherently will have a 2-year home residence requirement. So there's no ifs, ands, and buts. As a clinical physician, you will inherently be subject to that 2-year home residence requirement. So that means you either need to go back to Canada and fulfill the 2 years. And we can talk about, interesting strategies with that in a bit. or you have to get a J1 waiver. A J1 waiver, let's just go through it really briefly. Any government agency can issue a J1 waiver. The most common is a state CONRAD program. So every state in the nation has 30 J1 waivers they can issue each year. The federal government fiscal year starts on October 1st. And so that's when most CONRAD J1 waiver programs open, but a lot of states are pushing it up earlier, September. So the problem with the CONRAD J1 waivers is there's only 30 numbers. And if you can think back to what I said, that more and more residency programs and fellowship programs are pushing their residents and fellows into J1 status, there is a substantially higher demand for CONRAD J1 waivers now than ever before. And so each year for the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, we have been seeing the state CONRAD J1 waiver program fill up sooner and sooner and sooner. And I have a policy degree. I do a lot of lobbying in DC. We've been trying to work with the CONRAD programs for years to get increased numbers. But what that means for you is if you go into J1 status, the CONRAD waiver program is in very, very high demand. There are other options that you could get. There's a hardship waiver, which shows that a U.S. citizen spouse and or child would be subjected to extraordinary hardship if you were to return home. I think being Canadians, that's maybe a hard sell. There's a persecution waiver as well. Probably the same analysis. You would be subjected on race, religion, or political leanings. Canada, I think probably under your prime minister, that's a hard sell right now. So they may not be an option, but people like the hardship and persecution waiver because you don't have to work for 3 years in H1B status after you get the J1 waiver. And you contrast that with the CONRAD waiver. You have to work for 3 years in H1B status to fulfill the terms of the waiver. So the whole idea about the J1 waiver is we will tell you you don't have to go back to Canada for 2 years so long as you work in a medically underserved area in the US for 3 years in H1B status. And again, hardship and persecution don't have that 3-year service obligation tied to it, but all the rest of the J1 waivers do. The other options for J1 waivers are going to be, there's ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission. ARC is great if you're going to a worksite in that regional area. They just opened it up to specialists as well. It used to be limited to primary care only, so that's a good option if you fall, again, within that geographic location. There's the DRC, the Delta Regional Commission. It's similar to ARC. So both ARC and DRC are unlimited. So there are no numerical limitations. So it's great. If you want to go to those geographic areas, I highly recommend it. And then there's also an HHS waiver, a Health and Human Services waiver. That's a lot more restrictive. We've been trying to, again, over the years, get them to loosen it up a little bit, but it's primary care and you have to, oh, I'm sorry, this is terrible. So that's my technology glitch. My light keeps going off. HHS, you have to work in a federally qualified health center or a rural health center or a Native American health center with a really, really high number of indigent or underserved patients. But the HHS waiver, if you're going into an area that qualifies, is a really good option because the waivers go really quickly. There's no numerical limitation each year. And so I have been trying to steer more and more of my clients into ARC, DRC, and HHS waiver options. So that's the downfall of J1. The upside, and another downfall of J1 is that it is limited. You can only do your medical residency. There's no moonlighting. There's nothing. You're working for your residency sponsor, and that's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. The benefit, like we talked about J1, is that your spouse can get the employment authorization document, and that's, for some people, that's a healthy balance to strike. If you compare that with H1B, I think you will probably. It's interesting to me. Fewer and fewer programs are actually sponsoring people for H1B because if you read the news at all, you'll understand that even the H1B program is under assault. It's our immigration classification for specialists. Clearly, as medical doctors, you're professionals and you meet the criteria, but there's a really heavy burden in terms of, there's a lot of compliance that comes with the H1B program, so a lot of residency programs don't want to deal with it. There's wage obligations, there's reporting obligations. H1B is very specific to the work site. And so I think most of you will probably be going to programs where you're going to be pushed into J1, and H1B won't even be an option. But the really good thing about H1B status is, you don't have that 2-year home residence requirement. I will caution you though, if you are going to subspecialize, you're going to run into issues because H1B status is only good for 6 years. And then you're done. You only get 6 years. You can go back home for a year and then come back and get another 6 years. But if you're subspecializing, H1B is probably not a great option for you because you're going to run out of H1B time before you can get through the permanent residence, usually. Not always, but most of the time. The other nice thing, so that's the downfall about H1B is that you could potentially run out of time. If your spouse, like if H4 is an option for you, that's a great idea as well. If your spouse has been far enough along the permanent residence trajectory. But, I have clients who come to me all the time and say, I want H1B because I don't want to have that 2-year home residence requirement, but I'm going to be a thoracic cardiac surgeon. Well, you don't have enough time in H1B because 6 years is not enough time to even get through the fellowship training. So with everything, it's, the analysis of what your future immigration trajectory should be and what's a better classification for you is going to really largely depend on what your program permits you to do. And then also, what area of medicine are you looking to go into? If you're primary care and you can do H1B, fine, fair enough, do it. But if you're, if you want to be a subspecialist that has a 7-year overall training program, you can't do that in H1B status.
All right. So I found the follow-up. The EAD card question is for my permanent residency application. I'm assuming that they're safe.
Yeah, you can continue as long as the permanent residence application continues to pen. Then they can renew the EAD and they should be fine. Yep.
Okay. Someone wants to take a year off after finishing their MD degree, but so take a gap year between MD and residency on a J1. Is that possible at all, or
no? You, with your J1 status, you'll get a 30-day grace period at the end of it, but you can't work, and that's a period for you to wrap up your affairs. If you're at the end of your training, you can extend your J1 status to sit for the boards if your boards happen to be in like October of the particular year or September. But no, you can't. There's not. The concept of a gap year in U.S. immigration law just doesn't exist. Okay,
so if they graduate in June 2019, they basically have to start residency in July 2019. There's no option for that gap. Okay.
Or go home. Yeah.
Or go home. Yeah.
I mean, you have your OPT card, so you could do something that's related to medicine if you want to do like a research. But again, the whole, this country wants people to be working and contributing. So.
Understand. Someone wants to know roughly when along the process if they should get their own legal representation in case of J1 or H1B timeline when they should start talking to an immigration attorney, and how much. I understand that's very difficult to estimate cost based on no information, but just kind of ballpark figures.
Yeah, I saw that question and I was like, that's a really interesting question because you're all medical students and probably don't have deep pockets. What I will tell you is you're doing the right thing, coming to sessions like this and understanding the overall process. I will also tell you, I can't do anything for you really to go through the J1 sponsorship program through ECFMG. You guys can all do that. And in fact, I've actually never had anyone call me with ECFMG. I know one of the questions was about Health Canada changes, and I've had a couple of potential clients call me in terms of how they can actually get the J1 status because of the limitations of the Health Canada restrictions on the statement of needs. But right now, you guys getting into J1 status, you guys do that yourself. If you're going to a residency that sponsors H1B, that university or that program is going to have a lawyer on retainer, either in-house or outside counsel that they are working with. I guarantee it. In terms of the J1 waiver, if you happen to get, to be in J1 and need to go down that route, I would say, the beginning of your first year, you should be looking for J1 waiver employers, and you should be reaching out to an immigration attorney if your potential employer doesn't have one in the early, January, February of the year you will be completing your training program. Oftentimes I talk to physicians who are in their last year of training, and they wait a little too long because specifically because they want a Conrad waiver, and the process is just a quick turn now, and you really need to be thinking about things at the very beginning of your last year of training. And then kind of parlaying that into what costs that are involved. The law is very well, with the J1 waiver, the J1 status, there are small fees, but you're not going to have a lawyer helping you with that anyways. The H1B piece of it, the employer has to pay for everything. So your program's going to be paying for H1B, and you're not going to have to worry about costs for that at all. When you get out of residency and then you're going to clinical practice, again, the employer is going to be paying for the H1B piece of it as well. For J1 waiver, there's case law that exists that says it expects the employer to pay for the J1 waiver costs. I advise all of my employers to pay for the costs of the J1 waiver. I can't remember a time that they've not, because the government considers it a business expense. The case law that exists out there is only binding to a specific geographic location of this country, but it's a good idea of what the government expects employers to do. And you guys know it's a competitive market out there, especially if you're primary care. Clinics are having a hard time finding qualified physicians to hire. And ordinarily, the clinics and the employers are covering most of the legal fees for physicians, at least right now. So I won't give like a specific. I think if that rest assures that you guys probably will not end up paying for most of the legal fees, at least initially. I think that's one good takeaway to have.
All right, we have a couple of questions from the chat. Let's say I do my residency on J1. I either do a waiver or I go back home for the 2 years. That's done. If I come back to the United States on an H1B, does that lead to any complications involved with it, or is it just like if I was a newly licensed physician who wanted an H1B?
Yeah, the thing to remember about H1B is that there's numerical limitations every year, right? So October 1st, there's 65,000 numbers for people without higher degrees, and there's another 20,000 numbers for individuals with US-based master's degree or higher. So you guys all will have US-based medical degrees, so you would fall into that higher cap. So the way that the cap works, and the reason I'm telling you this is because it's important if you're going to an employer who's not cap exempt and you're not getting a Conrad waiver. So if you get a J1 Conrad waiver or an ARC waiver or a DRC waiver, you are personally exempt forever from that H1B cap. Okay, if you do H1B status straight out of your training, and I'm kind of making this question a little bit bigger because it's important for you guys to understand this. If you're doing H1B status directly out of your training, most likely you will be going to a cap exempt employer, which means the employer is outside of that numerical limitation I just talked about, right? So the employer can expedite the H1B and you don't have to file a lottery H1B petition. So in the specific question that you gave, if you get a J1 waiver, you're personally exempt. If the individual goes home and fulfills for 2 years and wants to come back in H1B, it depends on the status of the employer. That individual, if he or she is going to a private clinical practice that is not exempt from the H1B cap, will have to go through the H1B lottery. So that's an important thing to sort of understand when you're sort of thinking about how does H1B work for me. But that's another nice thing about the Conrad waivers is you're personally exempt forever for the life of your immigration case from that limitation.
Okay, I guess kind of the follow-up on the so let's say hypothetically our official graduation date is in June. Let's say we have time off in April. Is it safe to travel outside the United States on a vacation and then come back in time for J1 to start, or?
That's such a tough question. International travel is really hard these days. I don't know if you've all heard about the travel ban, because it very much depends on, well, I mean, you're all Canadian citizens, but if you're born in a country that's on a travel ban, that's a consideration. You guys are visa exempt, so, it should be okay as Canadian citizens. But anytime anyone travels, I always want to know where they're going. I want to know, when they're coming back, what port they're coming through, because I have clients travel all the time. There's millions of people who travel internationally every day. Usually it's fine, but I always like to look at the facts of the individual case before. I'm not going to say carte blanche, yes, you guys can all go on vacation in April, because I don't know those specific circumstances of your background.
Okay.
Just a quick addition to that. So Ms. Connors was just mentioning, so from her experience, traveling after the match day in March is fine, but students will need to start their OPT process ahead of time and be able to send the OPT form to the school to complete and send back. And then just an FYI for students that want to travel is usually a lot of residency orientations do start late June, so they can't be traveling too much later than that, hopefully.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to go back to, there was a new memo that came out on FMJ, and a lawsuit was actually filed yesterday. The government is really honed into non-immigrant intent. And non-immigrant intent is just that whole thing with F1 students that you intend to go back to Canada when you're done with your medical training, right? And I think we will continue to see strong evolutions in how CBP, Customs and Border Protection, is reviewing students when they are coming back from international travel. And so if you're transitioning into J1, J1 is a non-immigrant classification that also requires non-immigrant intent, probably okay, again, assuming you don't have additional background factors that are problematic. But if you're going into H1B, I mean, H1B is another non-immigrant classification, but I think, and Kathleen, I entirely appreciate all your comments. Those are very, very helpful, but I do really strongly want to highlight the fact that things change minute by minute in immigration for the past year and a half. And so I tell my clients all the time, just because it worked before doesn't mean that moving forward it will work. And I think Kathleen's right. Ordinarily, you should be fine. But let's make sure we pay attention before you book your international trip in April, because between now and April, who knows what's going to happen with students and international travel.
Okay. Someone wants to know if we can mix and match visas for residency and fellowship. So let's say hypothetically you do a residency on a J1, can they do a fellowship on H1B? I'm assuming they'd have to finish either go back, do return of service, or do a waiver before they can get the H1B, or reverse H1B residency and then J1 fellowship.
So the reverse should be fine. If you're doing an H1B for a few years and then going into J1, that's fine. But because the J1, you either need to fulfill or you need to get the J1 waiver. The J1 waiver has that 3-year service obligation in a medically underserved area. A fellowship is never going to fly with those facts. So
okay. Okay. So I understand that for some of us, the goal is a permanent resident card. The obvious one is get married. I understand there's a pathway to PR after H1Bs. Is there anything that any other ways that are that people find that you find that people in our position would go through?
So if you're really, really rich, you can do EB-5, which is an investor visa. But if you pay attention to the news, those are riddled with problems as well. I never touch them. I don't ever want to do an EB-5 in my case. But if you're really wealthy and your family wants to make an investment, or you can personally make an investment, look at it. But really, the options that as medical students, what you guys are looking at, marry a U.S. citizen, and then you can get the employment authorization that goes along with that. You will get conditional permanent residence, which means you have to remove the conditions after 2 years, because I'm assuming you're not married yet. Otherwise, you'd be a permanent resident. So, and then there is the employment-based process, but the employment-based process requires a permanent job. So keep in mind, residencies and fellowships are not considered permanent inherently, because it's a residency and a fellowship. And so if you're extraordinary, there's the EB-1 classification. It's employment-based first. It's for individuals with extraordinary ability. Oh, my light is killing me. But again, with residents and fellows, unless you're a super, super rock star, that's tricky as well. And if you're in J1 status, that complicates it.
Let's see. I'm assuming that someone wants to talk about working in the U.S. for a few years and then returning to Canada. Obviously, I'm assuming if you got an H1B, you can petition for a PR card at the end of the H1B, and that whether you can work in Canada is up to the relevant Royal College or Provincial Licensing Authority. Yeah. And then for the J1s, you would require either a waiver or you would have to go straight back home. Am I correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Felix, I think there was a question, and I don't know if you want me to talk about it, but I remember seeing a question about the Health Canada and the statement of need for J1. Do you want me to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that'd be great. So I emailed Health Canada a little while back, and I got an email from Health Canada saying that on September 10th, they stopped comparing statement of need issuances against the matrix. Yeah. So the interpretation is that previously closed off specialties like neurosurgery or orthopedic surgery are now viable options, but that may change on a year-by-year basis. If you could expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, essentially since I think 2015, we've been starting to see the, Health Canada have all these restrictions, and even with primary care, we've seen issues. But the bottom line, I think, for your perspective, they have different categories of how they classify physicians. You guys are in the B category because you're not in a Canadian residency right now. I think that's the A classification, but the B classification is for US or Canadian medical students who are not in a residency program in Canada. And I think what you guys need to do is just be aware that if you're matching and you need J1, you need to be doing the request for the statement of need immediately. The minute that you match, you're submitting, and the minute that because they have a filing window in terms of when you request the statement of need, and they limit it. It's limited, and it's based on the need in the particular province from which you come. All of these aspects. It's sort of like a Conrad waiver. The minute the window opens up to apply, you should be applying for that statement of need, because otherwise you could, match in your dream residency program and not have that required statement of need, and that's a really tough place to be in. And I've seen it before. And the only thing I would say is things change all the time. Felix, like you just learned, they just changed it again, and they continue to revise to whom they will give the numbers, the specialties, dependent on what Canada thinks it needs.
Someone wants to know, so you can go on J1, you can go straight from doing your J1 residency to a J1 fellowship.
Yes.
I have the text of the Health Canada email, and I just wanted to make sure that my interpretation is correct, that they're no longer limiting statement of need numbers.
Well, if you want to send it to me, I can look at it rather than waste everyone's time now, and then I can send you my feedback and we can share it with the group. Yeah,
that'd be great. We talk about that. So it's just to clarify on OPT. Someone wants clarification on OPT. It's like a 1-year extension of your F1 visa that buys you time, that buys you a year to either get an H1. My understanding is that H1Bs require step 3 to be written, whereas J1s do not.
That's true. Yeah, I should have pointed that out. You do need step 3 for H1B. For H1B, you need your state medical license, USMLEs. You guys don't need ECFMGs because we just talked about that. So, yeah. And the only reason and I will say the only caveat from having USMLEs at all is if you're an individual of international renown. So if you're a super accomplished individual, you could get out of the USMLEs entirely.
Okay. So someone asked J1 visa if they can start applying for immigration status in the U.S. My understanding is that the J1 visa is a non-immigrant. There's no pathway to citizenship through the J1, but there is to an H1B, correct?
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. And you can't get permanent residence based on a residency or a fellowship. You have to base it on the job, the clinical position you will hold after you finish your training.
Okay. We talked about OPT time. We should start applying, which lies with the OISS office. To figure out when earliest we can get OPT.
Yeah, I wonder, Kathleen, do you have a good sense of that? Maybe we can ask her and she can type it if she's listening.
Okay. And visa timelines, you mentioned kind of January of our first year for J1s. And is that true for H1B?
Can you repeat that question?
Timeline for applying for visas, just for both J1s and H1Bs.
You mean right now from when you're in medical school?
Yeah.
Yeah, so J1, I would start the January of your 4th year of medical school, and H1B the same thing. Yep.
Okay.
I just thought of a question actually while we're talking. So a lot of this is for first year medical students or second year medical students. We kind of have that one summer off between first and second year. And we were kind of encouraged to not use that kind of work visa, because I think it would eat into the OPT.
CPT, yeah.
So I guess what's interesting is just from what you're saying, if a student did end up using some of their OPT time for that summer job, I guess, are they going to be only eligible then for a J1 because they don't have that time to take step 3, basically, is what I'm thinking with kind of the buys.
Yeah, so let me kind of walk through that because that's a really interesting question, and we've been seeing some changes in that as well. So OPT, it's optional practical training. It's a post-degree completion work grant for 1 year. So you'll never get OPT during the course of your academic studies. CPT, curricular practical training, that's what you get when you're training. And the regulations state that, what's interesting, so long as you don't use the equivalent of 12 months of CPT during the course of your academic studies, you are still eligible for OPT, at least historically. But I had a colleague who just got this request from USCIS when the individual applied for OPT saying you used 8 months of CPT and therefore you're only eligible for 4 months of OPT. That's bizarre, and I think that's probably a one-off, but you do need to be, the takeaway is you really do need to know, you need to be cognizant of how much CPT you're using. You can do CPT full-time in the summer between your first and your second year, so presumably that's like a 3-month period of time. But I would stay tuned into how USCIS is treating. I don't think it's legally correct how USCIS was interpreting that one particular. Like if you used 8 months of CPT, you only get 4 months of OPT. I think the way the regulations are actually written is that you can't. If you use 12 months of full-time CPT, you become ineligible for OPT. But I would keep following that, and I would ask OIS or an immigration lawyer, because you want to be. You don't want to be relying on the fact that you're going to get a full year of OPT post-medical degree, and then USCIS is coming back and saying, well, but you did all the CPT time. So be aware of that.
Okay. I think we're getting pretty close to the end. Kind of last call for everybody watching live. If they have any questions, now is the time.
And an update from Ms. Connors was that when the question was, when should we start applying for OPT? I think it just is the best thing is just to contact the OISS office, because they'll know best.
Yeah, and you can do it now, and then they should be able to tell you a time frame in terms of at what point in your studies you should reach out. And I'll also say, I don't know if you guys mentioned it, but I did do like a general 2-page overview about the J1 waiver process, and I sent it to Kathleen, and I did just sort of a flow chart for J1 waivers. It's what I give my clients so they know what to expect when they work with my law firm. So helpful handouts. If there's other things that you guys would be that you think would be helpful from like a written perspective, I probably have it, and I'm happy to share it with you, because we've kind of been jumping around, and this is interesting to me. I usually have a PowerPoint that I go through chronologically the process. And it would be interesting for me to hear feedback from you guys if this format is helpful, or PowerPoint, so we can kind of chronologically go through it. But feedback, let me know what you want and what's been helpful or not.
And someone just texted me this. Someone else apparently had the same idea of going through a diversity visa lottery. For timeline-wise, if we get to a year in OPT and we get a card through diversity visa, would there be would we need to bridge that, or is the timeline okay? It all depends on the time frame. If you're getting the diversity lottery EAD in enough time, and if you're the lucky person that gets selected, fair enough, do it. But the diversity lottery is all over the place as well, and understand the government wants to remove that as well. They think it's hijacking the immigration system. So try it now, and if you're super lucky, then good for you. Then you don't have to deal with any of this. All right. I don't see any new questions in the chat. And then I'll send you
the one thing that we didn't talk about that might be interesting for you guys, particularly you're Canadian, and depending where you end up living, if you live on the border with the United States and Canada, historically, some people have, because you're visa exempt, and the prohibition with, okay, so let me start over again. If you're in J1 status and you don't want to go through the waiver process, what some people have done, Canadians, is they sleep in Canada and they cross the border every morning and every night to work in the US. It's, it can be referred to as sleeping in Canada or whatever. The burden, and so that's what you do, is you do that for 2 years, and you legally fulfill your 2-year home residence requirement, but work in H1B status in the US, because as a Canadian, you are visa exempt, and the prohibition with the 2-year home residence requirement is an H1B visa. So sort of this loophole that Canadians can do. And so if you're living in, upper state Michigan or wherever, Detroit or wherever you're living, some people have done that. Now, with everything I've said today, I will caution it with, just because it's worked in the past doesn't mean it will work in the future. The immigration government is trying to find all ways to come to know. But people have done it and it has worked, but the burden would be on you to show that you really did spend 2 full years living in Canada. Leases, evidence that you lived there, resided in Canada, what have you. So it's an interesting little caveat to file away.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I think we're pretty much out of time as well. I will send you the Health Canada email I got, and then Adriana, anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I'll just kind of wrap up here. And I think that the 2 documents that Ms. Peterson was mentioning are posted on the live chat, so people can click on those links there. But yeah, I just want to take the time to thank everyone for joining us on the Hangout today. Thank you very much, Sarah Peterson and the audience for your participation. If you have any questions, you can email myself or Felix. You can just type in our names on the emails, or my email is aclapp@med.wayne.edu. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, everyone. And thank you so much, Sarah Peterson, again, for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everyone.